Halloween, for most, is a night of costumes, candy, and laughter echoing down quiet suburban streets. But for two teenage girls in Oscoda, Michigan, the afternoon of October 31st, 1969, was the beginning of a mystery that would haunt their community for decades. Patricia Spencer, just 16 years old, and Pamela Hobley, only 15, left their high school together, walking side by side into the crisp autumn air. They were seen alive one final time, and then they were gone. No bodies, no belongings, no confirmed sightings. Just two high school girls who seemed to vanish into thin air. And over 50 years later, the same question remains. What really happened to Patty and Pam that Halloween afternoon? To understand the weight of this mystery, we need to look closely at who these girls were, their lives, their families, in the context of a small Michigan town in the late 1960s. Patty Spencer, described as kind-hearted and quiet, came from a hard-working family in Oscoda. She wasn't rebellious, wasn't in trouble with the law, and had no history of running away. Her life revolved around school, family, and the steady rhythm of a close-knit community. Friends recalled her as dependable, someone who could be counted on, someone who had plans for the future. Pam Hobley was more outgoing, a little more spirited, but still a responsible teenager. She was 15, still a child in many ways, though those who knew her said she carried herself with a maturity beyond her years. She had a light-hearted streak, enjoyed time with friends, and spoke often about her excitement for upcoming school events. That Halloween morning, both girls attended classes at Oscoda High School. The halls buzzed with the energy of teenagers talking about costumes, dances, and parties planned for the night ahead. But at some point that day, something shifted. At around midday, Patty and Pam were seen leaving the school building together. They didn't take their books. They didn't tell their families where they were going. They simply walked away, heading into the cool fall afternoon. This small decision will become the focal point of one of Michigan's most enduring unsolved mysteries. What makes this case so unsettling even today is not just the disappearance itself, but the complete absence of answers. No trail of evidence. No confirmed witnesses. Only rumors, conflicting statements, and theories that have piled up across the decades. For their families, the nightmare began almost immediately when Patty and Pam failed to return home that evening. Parents called friends, neighbors, anyone who might have seen them. By midnight, it was clear something was wrong. And when the girls were officially reported missing, the entire community would be drawn into a mystery darker and more enduring than anyone could have imagined. The official record tells us that Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley left Oscoda High School in the early afternoon of October 31st, 1969. The weather was typical for northern Michigan in late October. Brisk winds, falling leaves, a gray sky that made the day feel shorter than it was. Students who saw the girls leave recalled nothing unusual, just two friends walking together, stepping away from the busy hallways and chatter of classmates. They carried no coats despite the cold, and no school books. It wasn't the kind of preparation that suggested they planned to be gone long. When the girls failed to return home by dinner, concern set in quickly. For Patty, it was deeply out of character. She was known for her reliability. Her family immediately felt something wasn't right. Pam's family was more hopeful at first. She had a wider social circle, and they thought maybe she'd gone out to a party early or was visiting with friends. But as the evening stretched into night, both families began to panic. By midnight, phone calls had been made to friends, neighbors, and other students. No one had seen the girls. No one had any explanation. The families contacted local authorities, and a missing persons report was filed. But this was 1969, a different era in law enforcement. Police often assumed that teenagers who vanished had simply run away. The term runaway was stamped on countless missing persons reports, and in the eyes of authorities, two teenage girls who disappeared together on Halloween fit the profile. Investigators leaned on that assumption early. They speculated Patty and Pam had skipped school, possibly hitchhiked out of town, maybe even run away to start new lives elsewhere. It was an explanation that seemed to make sense in the first hours of confusion. But to the families, it made no sense at all. Pam's mother insisted her daughter wouldn't just vanish. Patty's family pushed back against the runaway theory. saying their daughter had no money, no change of clothes, no reason to leave. And besides, why leave on Halloween with dances, friends, and family gatherings ahead? As hours turned into days, the concern only deepened. The girls' belongings were still at home. They hadn't contacted friends. And crucially, there were no credible sightings. It was as if they had stepped off school grounds and vanished into thin air. Police began canvassing the area. Interviews were conducted with classmates, teachers, and known associates. Some reported seeing the girls walking along River Road that afternoon, a route leading away from the high school. But where they were heading remained unclear. A few tips suggested they might have been spotted near a gas station or attempting to hitchhike. Yet every lead collapsed under scrutiny. No firm timeline could be established. What investigators didn't know was chilling. The girls were last confirmed alive when they walked away from school. After that, nothing was certain. Meanwhile, rumors began to swirl in Oscoda. Some claimed the girls had run off with older men. Others whispered about drug use, dangerous acquaintances, or even hitchhiking gone wrong. In a small town, speculation spread quickly, but none of it brought the families closer to the truth. For law enforcement, the first week was critical. They expanded their search radius, checking wooded areas, abandoned buildings, and roadsides. Flyers with Patty and Pam's photos were distributed. Community volunteers joined searches, combing fields and neighborhoods. But the ground yielded nothing. No clothing, no personal items, no bodies. The trail had gone cold almost immediately. And in that silence, a haunting question began to grow. Had Patty and Pam left willingly, or had someone intercepted them? In the weeks following Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley's disappearance, the Oscoda community found itself torn between hope and fear. On one hand, there was the lingering possibility that the girls had simply run away, a choice, however painful, that meant they might still be alive. On the other, the chilling silence hinted at something far more sinister. The Oscoda Police Department, working with Iosco County officials, began piecing together a timeline. What they quickly discovered was troubling. There were no reliable sightings of Patty and Pam after they walked away from the high school that afternoon. A few classmates suggested they might have seen the girls along River Road, possibly hitchhiking. But these accounts varied and couldn't be confirmed. The runaway theory persisted. It was 1969, and many police forces defaulted to that explanation when teenagers vanished. Officials suggested the girls may have planned their disappearance, perhaps with the help of older acquaintances. There were even rumors they had been spotted in Flint or Detroit in the weeks afterward, living new lives far from Oscoda. But every supposed lead collapsed under scrutiny. No hard evidence ever confirmed the girls were alive beyond October 31st. Pam's family resisted the runaway theory the hardest. They knew her habits, her routines. She had a boyfriend she was close with, friends she confided in. Nothing pointed toward her wanting to leave. Patty's family felt the same. Their daughter wasn't the type to abandon her home or siblings without warning. But if they hadn't run away, then what happened? One line of thought was grim but practical. Hitchhiking. In 1969, it was common for teens to thumb rides along highways and rural roads. Hitchhiking was considered risky, but not unusual. Could Patty and Pam have accepted a ride from the wrong person? A stranger who pulled off the road and offered them a lift, but had other intentions? Investigators quietly explored that theory. They interviewed known offenders in the area, questioned drivers, and checked for reports of suspicious activity on Halloween night. But the leads went nowhere. No one admitted to picking the girls up. No vehicle descriptions matched. Meanwhile, the families held out hope that maybe, just maybe, the girls had left willingly but would eventually return. Holidays passed with empty chairs at family dinners. Birthdays came and went without phone calls or cards. The silence was deafening. By early 1970, the case had already begun to stall. Without evidence, without witnesses, and without bodies, investigators found themselves with almost nothing to work with. Oscoda was a small town with limited resources, and despite help from state authorities, the search grew colder with each passing month. Then came the rumors, whispers that suggested something darker still. Some claimed Patty and Pam had fallen into the wrong crowd, perhaps older men involved in drugs. Others whispered about possible connections to criminal activity along Michigan's highways, transient truck drivers, drifters passing through, predators who might have seen an opportunity on Halloween night. There was even speculation about ritual elements. The fact that it was Halloween fed into a wave of paranoia. People wonder if the girls had crossed paths with someone using the holiday as cover for something unspeakable. None of it could be proven, but in the absence of answers, theories flourished. And then, as the years slipped by, another tragedy emerged, the loss of time itself. Vital witnesses moved away. Memories faded. Evidence, if it ever existed, decayed. And still, the truth about what happened to Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley remained just beyond reach. The question now was not just where did they go, but who wanted them gone. For the families of Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley, the days after Halloween turned into weeks, then months, then years. And each year that passed without answers became its own kind of torture. Patty's family tried to keep her memory alive, clinging to the small rituals of remembrance. Her mother left a light on in the window for months after she vanished, a silent beacon for her daughter to find her way home. Pam's family did the same, waiting for a knock on the door, for the phone to ring, for a letter to arrive. But the silence never broke. The small town of Oscoda, too, lived under the weight of the girl's disappearance. Parents warned their children to stay closer to home. The image of two bright, spirited teenagers simply vanishing cast a shadow over the entire community. The longer the case went unsolved, the wilder the speculation grew. People whispered about the possibility of the girls being lured into cars by someone they trusted. Others spoke of older men in the area known for taking advantage of younger women. Some suggested drugs, parties, bad decisions, theories that blamed the victims instead of seeking the truth. One of the cruelest aspects of the case was the way rumors turned the girls into ghosts long before the official files did. Each whispered theory added another layer of doubt and pain for the families left behind. Were their daughters alive somewhere, trapped in circumstances they couldn't escape, or had they met a violent end, hidden somewhere in the forests and rivers surrounding Oscoda? As the 1970s bled into the 1980s, Patricia and Pamela's names began to fade from public memory. The newspapers stopped writing updates. Their high school friends graduated, moved away, started families of their own. For some, the girls were frozen in time, forever teenagers who never got the chance to grow up. But for their families, the wound never healed. Year after year, they petitioned investigators, begged for new searches, and tried to keep the case alive in any way they could. They wanted answers, or at the very least, a grave to visit. The problem was that evidence had been scarce from the very beginning. No bodies, no confirmed sightings, no physical clues beyond the last moment anyone saw them alive. Without leads, the police case grew cold, filed away under the weight of other crimes demanding attention. And yet, the fear remained. Because if two teenage girls could vanish into thin air on Halloween night in Oscoda, Michigan, what else could happen, and to whom? For decades, the truth remained buried under layers of rumor, silence, and fading memories. But then, as the years stretched on, new tools and new eyes would eventually return to the case, breathing life into a mystery that had once seemed destined to fade into history. For decades, Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley were little more than faces in faded yearbook photos, names whispered in Oscoda when the subject of unsolved mysteries came up. But in the 2000s and beyond, something began to change. Law enforcement and the world had new tools. The rise of DNA testing, digital record-keeping, and national missing persons databases breathed fresh life into countless cold cases. Families who had once resigned themselves to silence began to hope again. Could science finally answer questions that the human eye and memory had failed to solve? Investigators with the Michigan State Police began to re-examine old case files. Witness statements were reread, timelines reconstructed, and names once thought irrelevant were looked at again. Crucially, items belonging to the girls, pieces of clothing, personal effects, and whatever physical evidence had survived the decades were preserved, tested, and compared against national databases. In 2010, both Patricia and Pamela were officially added to the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, known as NAMUS. Their faces, once confined to fading posters and local police boards, now appeared online, accessible to anyone, anywhere in the world. The single step meant tips could come in from far beyond Oscoda. And they did. Strangers began to call in, people who thought they might have seen the girls over the years. Some claimed they'd spotted runaways matching their descriptions in other states. Others suggested connections to serial offenders who passed through Michigan during the late 1960s and early 1970s. A few tips were wild, unbelievable even, but others demanded closer inspection. At the same time, advances in forensic anthropology and the work of volunteer organizations gave investigators new ways of comparing unidentified remains with missing persons cases. Across the country, skeletal remains discovered in woods, deserts, and rivers were tested against Patricia and Pamela's profiles. Again and again, hopes would rise and then fall. Each possible match turned out to belong to someone else's tragedy. Still, persistence mattered. And in 2013, the Michigan State Police announced they were actively reinvestigating the case. Detectives interviewed surviving family members, former classmates, and people who had lived in Oscoda in 1969. They released age-progressed images of both girls, speculative portraits of what they might have looked like if they had lived into their 50s. For a community that had only ever seen them as teenagers, these haunting digital sketches were powerful reminders of how much time had been stolen. The renewed efforts brought national attention. Newspapers revisited the story. Podcasts and true crime shows took an interest. Suddenly, Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley were no longer just local ghosts. They were symbols of how the past can refuse to stay buried, and how justice delayed doesn't always have to mean justice denied. But with attention came new theories and new controversies. Some pointed fingers at known criminals in the area. Others believed the girls had fallen victim to traffickers, or worse, buried somewhere in the endless woods that surround Oscoda. Investigators stayed tight-lipped, confirming little, denying less. And so, more than 5 decades after they walked away from their high school, Patricia and Pamela's case stood at a crossroads. For the first time in years, there was momentum, a sense that the truth might be within reach. But the truth, as it often does in cases like this, remained elusive. When two healthy, vibrant teenagers vanish in broad daylight from a small town, explanations are few, and each one darker than the last. For Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley, several theories have emerged over the years. None proven, all haunting. The first theory is the simplest, that they were runaways. Some in Oscoda remembered Pamela talking about leaving, about being tired of a strict household and dreaming of a different life. Others recalled Patricia feeling restless, wanting freedom beyond the confines of small-town Michigan. In the turbulence of the late 1960s, with the counterculture booming and young people rejecting authority, the idea that 2 teenage girls might have taken off together seemed believable. But would they really have left without a trace? Without money, clothes, or contacting their families ever again? Even runaways usually leave footprints. Patricia and Pamela left nothing. The second theory is more sinister: abduction. Some believe the girls were lured into a car, perhaps by someone they trusted, or forced into one by someone they didn't. The area around Oscoda in 1969 was remote, with long stretches of highway and countless wooded backroads, where a predator could disappear. Once in a vehicle, the girls could have been taken anywhere, across the state, across the country, or silenced permanently before anyone knew they were missing. Then there are whispers of local involvement. Over the years, names have been floated. Men who lived in Oscoda at the time, some with criminal histories, others later tied to violent crimes. A few of these individuals allegedly bragged about knowing what happened, though no confessions have ever been substantiated. Investigators have followed these leads carefully, but without physical evidence, rumors remain rumors. A fourth theory ties the case to wider crime patterns in Michigan and beyond. The late 1960s and early 1970s saw several cases of young women abducted and murdered across the state, from Ann Arbor to Detroit. Could Patricia and Pamela have been early victims of a traveling offender? Someone like John Norman Collins, the so-called co-ed killer who terrorized Michigan during that same era? While no direct links have ever been confirmed, the timing is chilling. And then there are the darker, stranger theories. Some suggest connections to organized crime or human trafficking networks. Others whisper about cult activity, fueled by the Halloween timing of the disappearance. While these theories are the most speculative, they reveal something about human psychology. When answers are absent, imagination fills the void. Through it all, one painful fact remains. Not a single piece of definitive evidence has surfaced to tell us where Patricia and Pamela went that October afternoon. No remains, no confirmed sightings, nothing concrete to close the loop. Instead, we are left with possibilities. Did they slip away willingly, only to meet with danger on the road? Were they targeted by someone who knew they'd be walking alone that day? Or was their disappearance the work of chance? Being in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in the path of someone with unspeakable intentions? In mysteries like this, the theories multiply because the silence is unbearable. And in Oscoda, that silence has stretched across generations. For Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley's families, the disappearance wasn't a mystery to be studied. It was a wound that never healed. Imagine being Patricia's parents, watching the clock on Halloween night in 1969. First midnight passed, then morning, and still no sign of your daughter. At first, maybe there was denial. She's at a friend's house. She'll be home soon. But as hours stretched into days, that fragile hope collapsed under the weight of reality. Pamela's family felt the same crushing silence. One moment, she was walking out of Oscoda High School with a smile, a teenager with her whole life ahead of her. The next moment, she was gone, as though the earth had swallowed her up. Parents knocked on doors. They called friends. They pleaded with police. But in a time before cell phones, before social media, before national databases, their reach was painfully limited. What followed were years of birthdays missed, holidays filled with empty chairs, and milestones forever unmarked. Patricia never had a graduation, never had a wedding, never held children of her own. Pamela never celebrated a 20th birthday, never returned home to visit her parents, never got the chance to grow old. Their lives ended in silence, even if their deaths remain officially unconfirmed. The grief was compounded by doubt. For decades, whispers in town suggested the girls had simply run away, leaving their families to wrestle with the cruel question. Did their daughters choose to vanish? Parents clung to hope, combing through rumors of sightings, but each lead ended the same way, with nothing. Every dead end reopened the wound. Over time, the families were forced into an impossible balancing act, learning to live their lives, raise their other children, pay their bills, while never, ever closing the door on Patricia and Pamela's return. That kind of grief doesn't end. It only reshapes itself into something you carry daily, like an invisible weight on your shoulders. Some parents died without answers. Some siblings grew into adulthood, haunted by a story that defined their childhoods. And as the decades passed, new generations, nieces, nephews, cousins, grew up knowing Patricia and Pamela only as names in a family tragedy. But even in the darkest years, one truth remained. The families never stopped searching, never stopped asking questions, never stopped hoping that somewhere, somehow, someone would finally tell them what happened. Because when a child vanishes, time may pass, but the bond doesn't break. The questions don't fade. The grief doesn't end. For Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley's families, the wait has stretched more than 50 years. A half-century of not knowing. A half-century of pain. And yet, in that long silence, a faint flicker of hope has remained. Because sometimes, even decades later, justice can stir. For decades, Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley's disappearance gathered dust in police files, an unsolved mystery that seemed frozen in time. The 1970s passed, then the 1980s, the 1990s, with no breakthroughs. But the dawn of the 21st century brought new tools, new science, and, perhaps most importantly, new determination. Cold case detectives across the United States were beginning to reopen long-forgotten files, re-examining evidence with modern techniques. Oscoda, Michigan, was no different. Law enforcement quietly began reviewing the Spencer and Hobley case with fresh eyes. In 2010, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released updated age-progressed photos of both girls, showing what Patricia and Pamela might look like in their 50s. For families and investigators alike, it was a haunting reminder that the missing don't just vanish into thin air. They age, they change, they could still be out there. But the question was, were they alive to see those years? Then, in the 2010s, another shift occurred. The FBI began offering assistance to small police departments on cold cases, using advanced forensic testing unavailable back in 1969. DNA evidence, once impossible to process, could now yield answers. Detectives went back to square one. They interviewed old witnesses. They rechecked reports. They asked if anything at all, had been overlooked, and in the process, rumors resurfaced. Some said the girls had been murdered that very night, their bodies hidden somewhere in the woods or beneath a forgotten barn. Others whispered that local drug dealers may have been involved, silencing the girls after they stumbled into the wrong scene. And some, even more darkly, wondered whether the case had ties to predators who operated along Michigan's highways in the late 1960s and 1970s. Police publicly admitted one crucial thing. They believed foul play was involved. After all, Patricia and Pamela didn't run away with wallets, cash, or bags. They left their lives behind with no warning. And not once in more than 50 years has either girl contacted family, friends, or authorities. That silence, investigators say, speaks volumes. In 2013, Michigan State Police officially reopened the case. Detectives went back into the community, knocking on doors once again, hoping that time might loosen lips. Sometimes, all it takes is one person, finally ready to unburden themselves, to unlock decades of silence. And in 2020, a major announcement arrived. Authorities confirmed they had obtained DNA samples connected to the case. Testing was being done against databases, and though no public match has yet been released, the revelation injected new life into the investigation. Forensic genealogy, the same technique used to catch the Golden State Killer, was now on the table. Could Patricia and Pamela's case finally be solved through science that didn't even exist when they vanished? But with that hope came shadows. Each new headline was a reminder that half a century had passed, and the trail had grown cold. Witnesses had died. Evidence had been lost. Memories had faded. The chances of a neat resolution dwindled with every year. Still, detectives insist the case is not closed. There is evidence. There are leads. And there is belief. As one investigator put it, someone out there knows what happened to Patricia and Pamela. We just need them to come forward. For families who have waited so long, these words are a double-edged sword. Proof that the girls are not forgotten, but also a reminder that justice remains agonizingly out of reach. When two teenage girls vanish without a trace, theories multiply like shadows. Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley's disappearance has been no exception. For over 50 years, speculation has swirled. Some ideas chillingly plausible, others drifting into the realm of rumor and urban legend. The first and most obvious theory is the one police have leaned toward for decades. Foul play at the hands of someone local. Patricia and Pamela left school that afternoon, telling friends they had plans but giving no details. If they had arranged to meet someone, perhaps an older acquaintance, a boyfriend, or even someone offering a ride, it might explain why they willingly left together. The idea that the girls got into a car with someone they trusted has always haunted investigators. If that person harbored darker intentions, it could have been the last decision they ever made. A darker version of the same theory ties their disappearance to the region's drug scene of the late 1960s. Oscoda was not immune to the influx of drugs sweeping across America, and rumors persisted that the girls may have accidentally witnessed or learned too much about local trafficking operations. If true, silencing them would have been a brutal but effective way of ensuring secrets stayed buried. While never substantiated, this theory refuses to die, particularly among locals who recall whispers of shady dealings in the area during that era. Another possibility explored by some investigators is that the girls ran away. After all, both were teenagers, and tensions at home or the lure of adventure can drive young people to make impulsive decisions. Yet the evidence against this theory is strong. They left without money, without clothes, without personal belongings. And perhaps most telling, in over 50 years, not one verified sighting of either Patricia or Pamela has been reported. Statistically, it is virtually unheard of for runaways to stay completely off the radar for half a century. Some theorists take a step further, suggesting the girls may have fallen victim to a traveling predator. The late 1960s and 1970s saw a disturbing rise in serial offenders operating across the country. Hitchhiking culture and lack of modern databases made young women especially vulnerable. Some have even speculated about links to known killers like John Norman Collins, the co-ed killer active in Michigan during that exact time frame. While there is no hard evidence connecting Collins to Patricia and Pamela, the overlap in geography and era has kept the possibility alive. And then, there are the more unusual rumors. Stories that point to hidden graves in rural fields, barns where screams were once heard, or confessions made in whispers decades after fact. These accounts often reach police but crumble under scrutiny, either lacking evidence or based on hearsay passed down through generations. Still, every rumor forces investigators to ask, is this finally the lead that will break the case open? Of all the haunting what-ifs, perhaps the most devastating is the simplest, that Patricia and Pamela were killed that very night, their bodies hidden somewhere so effectively that they have never been found. Oscoda is surrounded by dense forests, winding rivers, and isolated farmland. A determined perpetrator could have disposed of evidence in ways that would make recovery nearly impossible, especially given the limited search resources in 1969. For the families, each theory is a blade with two edges. The idea of foul play is horrifying, but at least it offers an explanation. The thought of the girls running away might suggest they were alive once, yet their silence since 1969 is unbearable, and the possibility of serial killers or organized crime makes their story part of something even larger, even darker. Through it all, one truth remains constant. No theory has ever been proven. Patricia and Pamela's fate remains one of Michigan's deepest mysteries, locked in silence for over 5 decades. For the families of Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley, life has been divided into 2 eras, before Halloween of 1969 and everything after. In the first, there was ordinary teenage laughter, school dances, and dreams of futures that stretched wide open. In the second, there has only been silence, a silence filled with aching questions and the unbearable absence of answers. In the early days, both families clung to hope. Hope that the girls had run away to start fresh somewhere else. Hope that a phone call would come or a letter would arrive, explaining everything. As weeks turned to months and months to years, hope transformed into something heavier, a desperate need for closure. But closure never came. Pamela's younger siblings grew up with a constant shadow hanging over their lives, their childhood defined not just by loss, but by uncertainty. Patricia's family, too, carried the same wound. Each passing anniversary carved the pain deeper. Each headline or rumor reopened the raw question. What really happened to our daughters? In interviews decades later, relatives spoke of the way this case consumed them. One family member said, "The not knowing is the hardest part. If you know, even if it's the worst, you can grieve. But we've been stuck in this in-between place for more than 50 years. That limbo of never having a body to bury, never knowing whether to mourn or to hope, is its own form of cruelty." The community of Oscoda is not forgotten either. For many, the image of those 2 girls, arm in arm, leaving school on a crisp October afternoon, has never faded. Candlelight vigils, social media campaigns, and calls for renewed investigation continue even now. In recent years, advances in DNA technology and cold case databases have given some families hope, and Patricia and Pamela's loved ones pray the same tools might one day unlock the mystery. But as the decades stretch on, the silence grows heavier. The abandoned paths, the whispers of rural roads, the forests and rivers that may still hold secrets, they remain mute witnesses. Somewhere, someone knows the truth, or perhaps the truth is buried in time itself, fading with each passing year. What lingers most is the sense of lives unlived. Patricia was just 16, Pamela only 15. In an instant, their futures vanished. No graduations, no weddings, no children, no chance to grow old. Instead, they are forever frozen in that October twilight. 2 girls walking away into history. And so the story of Patricia Spencer and Pamela Hobley endures as a question without an answer. It is a reminder that horror does not always announce itself with violence and spectacle. Sometimes it comes quietly on an ordinary school day, leaving behind nothing but shadows. The last words belong not to speculation or theory, but to the silence left in their wake. More than 50 years later, Patricia and Pamela's absence is still felt. In every photograph, every empty chair, every unspoken memory, their families still wait. Their community still wonders. And until the day the truth is revealed, their story will remain one of Michigan's most haunting mysteries. Because sometimes the scariest thing of all is not what we know, but what we may never find out.